the election progressed, both before the election, during the counting, and what has happened after, makes Pakistan into something of a joke. Again, it would be a travesty to call it an elected government. It was entirely selected, handpicked in some ways by the Pakistani military establishment. So the election in India, which has started, is really the greatest democratic show in the world. And they think that elections in India are won and lost on the issue of Pakistan. Again, like I said, delusional, bizarre, crazy, but yeah, that's Pakistan. They think that India lives, breathes, sleeps, and nightmares about Pakistan. It is the main axis of Indian politics. In February this year, we had something which resembled an election in Pakistan. Frankly, to call it an election would be a travesty, because the way that entire election progressed, both before the election, during the counting, and what has happened after, makes Pakistan into something of a joke when it comes to democracy, when it comes to elections, when it comes to all those nice things which countries aspire for. But it was very clearly a very contentious election, and the government that came as a result of that election is really, again, it would be a travesty to call it an elected government. It was entirely selected, handpicked in some ways by the Pakistani military establishment. So it's a kind of a puppet regime which is there. It is powerless, quite clearly. But just 2 months after that, we are seeing a real election, the greatest election in the world, easily the most transparent, most efficient election, the biggest by far, by in fact several stretches. The next biggest election is like not even 1/3 the size of an Indian election. So the election in India, which has started, is really the greatest democratic show in the world. And the Pakistanis very clearly are looking at what is happening in India and what is happening in the election, and what might be happening in Indian politics as things start unfolding. Now, in Pakistan, there is very clearly a kind of a mixed feeling. It's a combination of expectation, or I would say hopes, and I'll come to what they are hoping for. There is certainly a lot of edginess and trepidation, but I think there is also a kind of sneaking admiration for how a country like India, 1.4 billion, almost a billion voters, how an election is held in this country. And despite all the noise which is made, the results are accepted. The election is extremely efficient. It's very long. Pakistani elections happen in one day, and the results are announced, whatever those results are. And they are announced within 24 hours, in fact even less. And then depending on which way the results are going, by the time midnight comes, the results start being changed by the people who are counting the votes. Even counting the votes is not enough. You could have one count of votes and another person could be declared elected. So that's the way Pakistanis run elections. But they see how elections are run in India, the use of EVMs, electronic voting machines, which are, despite all the carping sounds that people make, have been accepted as a given. And it's not as though only one party wins because of EVMs. We've seen different states elect different parties, throwing up surprises, and who knows whether there's a surprise waiting in the current elections as well. But I think there is certainly a kind of admiration in the Pakistanis on how we run our elections, but they also have some concerns. Some of them legitimate, some of them less so. But the really fun part of listening to, watching Pakistani television, listening to podcasts and other things which come out of Pakistan, or reading the stuff, drivel I should say, which appears in their newspapers, I think it's really fun, because the kind of hot takes that the Pakistanis have on Indian politics is kind of really is quite amusing and entertaining. But I think it's also kind of ironic, because to see the Pakistanis worry about the future of democracy in India when it is non-existent in their own country, for them to talk about institution capture in India, when what they have in their own country is what they themselves describe as a hybrid pro-max kind of a regime, which is basically the mask is civilian but the power is of the military. They have that kind of a system. They have a judiciary which is so scandal-ridden, so obsequious to the military, that even a captain and major can go and order a judge around. That's the kind of judiciary they have, and they feel entitled to comment on the judicial processes in India. Just because a judgment might not go according to what the Pakistanis want it to be, they will take potshots at the Indian judiciary. So it's kind of strange. I don't know what is the exact word to describe how the Pakistanis look at India. But they feel entitled, for example, to talk about press freedoms in India. They have a press which cannot even mention the name of a general on television or in their newspapers. They actually blank out what is being said about the army or about the judges or about a range of other things. They don't have the guts to even mention the army. They will speak in euphemisms, establishment, idare or institutions, riyasat. The army is called the riyasat. Riyasat means the state. So they, in a sense, I don't know if they're doing it wittingly or unwittingly, the so-called brave, intrepid journalists of Pakistan do not have the guts. I would use some other words, but guts is good enough to actually even talk about the army openly. And here are these people who talk about Indian democracy and press freedoms in India. It's rather rich coming from them. So I think, these are people who do not look inside. They will talk about how corporate houses are owning media in India. What about Pakistan? Who owns media in Pakistan? Except for a couple of family-owned newspapers, mostly it's the corporates which run newspapers in Pakistan also. And in fact, corporate advertising decides editorial policy. Apart from the military, it's the corporates who decide editorial policy in Pakistan. So but a country which is steeped in deep inferiority when it comes to India, I'm not surprised to hear what we hear coming from Pakistan. They have joblessness in their country, but they will look at what they see as growing joblessness in India to take potshots at the current government, and then hope that because of the downturn in economics in India, which they seem to believe that there is a massive downturn taking place, that there will be a reaction against the incumbent government in India, and they will be voted out of office. In Pakistan itself, you have inflation which is over 20%. You have food inflation which is over 30%. You have industry and businesses closing down, but they are worried about joblessness in India. But that's the Pakistanis for you. Now, when they are looking at elections in India, I think there is a certain realization, partly because of the kind of surveys and the kind of reportage which has happened in India, I think they see that the incumbent Modi regime winning the election, that seems to be the most likely outcome. But there is a deep hope. I think they are fervently praying that Modi loses the election, that there is a kind of an opposition government alliance which comes into office, because they think that once there is a kind of a regime change in India, a new government takes office, a new government which is not of the NDA but of the India alliance comes into office, then the Pakistanis will have a run of India. All doors will open up to Pakistan. They can go back to what they were doing in the past. They can continue to sponsor terrorism in India, and they will have a government in India which will sweet talk them. They hope that whichever government comes into power will overturn the constitutional reforms which have taken place in Jammu and Kashmir. They think that the way things were happening in Jammu and Kashmir, that entire ecosystem of terrorism that had been built up over 3 decades will come back in Jammu and Kashmir, because the government or the government they expect to come into power under a false notion of secularism and democracy will allow those characters to come back and run havoc in Jammu and Kashmir. So they think all of that is likely to happen. There are, of course, still some sane voices left in Pakistan who say that, look, don't be foolish. Even if there is a government of the opposition parties today which comes into power, for example, the Congress party, don't think that they are going to hand over Kashmir to you on a platter. When the Congress party was in power last time, there wasn't much that they allowed Pakistan to do. But I think even if the Congress party was to follow that old line of its, there is a feeling in the Pakistanis that they can play around. They can run circles around a government which is dominated by the Congress or some of the other members of the India alliance. Their favorite seems to be Mr. Kejriwal, the Delhi Chief Minister. You will see many Pakistanis talk about him in glowing terms. I'm not so sure as many Indians would do the same, but nevertheless, there are many Pakistanis who think Kejriwal might be the great hope for Pakistan in India. And they think that if there is a government a non-BJP government which comes into power, it will be a government which will probably open the doors to IPL for them. It will open the doors for Bollywood to them. It will open all kinds of doors which were earlier open to them. They'll be able to travel in India. They'll be able to play havoc in India. That's the sense they have. But they also know that maybe they are hoping against hope. And the chances are that the current government will be returned to office. Perhaps with the same mandate it had last time, perhaps with a bigger mandate, who knows. Maybe even if the mandate goes down, they are in pole position and they are likely to form the next government. So they have to start preparing themselves, therefore, for another 5 years of Mr. Modi or one of his associates, maybe even longer. And so they are wondering what is the room for play. For example, if they want to have trade with India, that trade is not going to happen without riders. So they are wondering what is it that they will need to do to make sure that there can be some kind of normalization, which now suits them much more than it suits India. Now, the hope in the Pakistanis is that if Mr. Modi was to lose the election, there was another person who forms the government, they will go back to that old template that, okay, fine, we'll trade with the Pakistanis, which suits the Pakistanis, and they will not be very tough on the issue of terrorism. But if Mr. Modi was to come back to power, then there would be problems for Pakistan, because certainly there's not going to be any free lunch for Pakistan from India, even whether it's trade or any of the other things. So they need to start figuring out how they want to manage. Do they want that, the current kind of state of affairs where there's virtually no communication between the two sides, no real links. They want that for another 5 years. Frankly, it doesn't matter to India, but can the Pakistanis afford it? Can they continue with the kind of hostility which they've been showing? Incidentally, that hostility level within Pakistan hasn't really come down. Don't fall for the kind of nonsense you hear from the usual suspects in Pakistan. Look at what the people who really matter in Pakistan are saying and doing. Ishaq Dar, the foreign minister, does not matter in Pakistan. Shehbaz Sharif, the weakest prime minister of Pakistan ever, does not matter in Pakistan. What matters is the Pakistan army under Asim Munir, his coterie of generals, and then the larger establishment ecosystem, the journalists who are close to the establishment, the writers who are close to the establishment, the other people, public figures who are close to the establishment, what are they saying? What is the permanent bureaucracy of the Pakistan Foreign Office saying about India? What is the kind of defense posturing that the Pakistanis have? What is the kind of propaganda campaigns they're carrying on? That should tell you more about the attitude of the Pakistani, the real state, the real power brokers in Pakistan, not what some of these politicians like Bilawal Bhutto or anybody else might say. Most of them, in any case, play to the gallery to appease their masters who are not their friends in Pakistan. So I think we need to be very clear. Perhaps the current people are very clear, and the Pakistanis realize that taking these guys for a ride is not going to be that easy. The other thing which comes out very clearly when you look at how the Pakistanis are looking at elections in India is that, it actually is a little surprising because the Pakistanis are among the most ignorant about the realities of India. And I say this with all seriousness. They seem to imagine India with all the prejudice and bias which they have and the hatred which they have for the Hindus of India and for India in general. And that colors their assessment, their analysis of India, which is why they always get India wrong. Now, if you look at the Pakistanis and the general public discourse in Pakistan, they think that if Mr. Modi was to win, even his previous victories, is all because of Pakistan bashing, or because of institutional capture, or because of Hindutva. They very gladly lap up, gleefully in fact, they lap up every negative story which the woke Western media wants to publish about India, telescope an odd incident, and then blow it up to show that India is burning, kind of a thing. And the Pakistanis will lap it up because it fits their stereotype of India and the kind of outlook they have on the BJP or the RSS or any of the other Hindu organizations in India. So that is one perspective from which they come. And they think that elections in India are won and lost on the issue of Pakistan. Yes, I know that is delusional, that is plain bizarre and crazy, but yes, that is Pakistan. That's the Pakistan you are dealing with. That a government is voted back in office because of the work it has done on the ground, the lives of people it has touched, the direct connection it has made with people, both at an emotional level as well as at an economic level, is something that simply the Pakistanis cannot understand, because it does not happen in their country. And what does not happen in their country, they think does not happen in any other country in the region or the rest of the world. So if they think that the Pakistan army is very powerful in Pakistan, they think the Indian army is just as powerful in Pakistan. Again, like I said, delusional, bizarre, crazy, but yeah, that's Pakistan. So they think that Pakistan is in many ways the central pillar around which Indian politics revolves. Uh, they think that India lives, breathes, sleeps, and nightmares about Pakistan. It is the main axis of Indian politics, and it's always the central issue of Indian politics. Frankly, anybody who has seen Indian elections, anybody who has been to the hustings, who has seen the kind of speeches, the kind of political management that takes place, will tell you that Pakistan is a fringe factor. An odd speech, maybe in a speech of one hour, the Prime Minister, the Home Minister, the Raksha Mantri will talk about Pakistan, maybe a sentence, 2 sentences, and that also in relation to a particular topic. The press will, of course, make headlines out of it, and the Pakistanis will think that, well, they remain relevant, they remain important in the Indian context, and they are the central pole around which Indian politics revolves. So this is what has been happening, and that still seems to be happening in Pakistan. They cannot simply understand that in many things they are quite irrelevant in the Indian context as well. Yes, it will be one of the many issues, this will be an issue, but it will always be in the context of something negative. Most likely terrorism, most likely how a country is failing, and stuff like that. There is never any positive contribution that Pakistan has, either in Indian politics or Indian society, in Indian culture, nothing. But the Pakistanis like to think that the entire world, before it sleeps, it's thinking of Pakistan, and the moment it wakes up, it's thinking of Pakistan. So too in India. The other thing which the Pakistanis are hoping for is that even if Mr. Modi was to win the election, then in his 3rd term, which might well be his last term, who knows, Indian politics you can never predict, but they think that Mr. Modi will then be looking for his legacy. Again, the Pakistanis put themselves at the center of what any Indian leader's legacy will be. Again, I think this is delusional, I think this is bizarre, and I think this is crazy, but this is Pakistan. So they think that the legacy, the abiding legacy of any leader is whether he can make up with Pakistan. Now, if only the Pakistanis had bothered to see or read the transcripts of 2 of the recent interviews Mr. Modi has given, one to the ANI and the other to Newsweek. And it is very clear that Pakistan is not the legacy that Mr. Modi wants to leave behind. He has spoken about what he might want to leave behind as a legacy. And frankly speaking, people who are politicians, I think it's this legacy factor has come up in the last 10 years or so. The Americans have started floating this, that every leader looks to leave a legacy. But I think the guy who's in the rough and tumble of politics, he's more interested in retaining power and winning power rather than leaving a legacy. Of course, Mr. Modi might want to leave some legacy, but Mr. Modi is very clear what the legacy he wants to leave for India. The legacy he wants to leave for India is a very strong, prosperous India. That is going to be his abiding legacy. His legacy is going to be that he is the man under whose watch the Ram temple came up, which is a civilizational thing. He is going to look for those things as his legacy. Pakistan is not his legacy issue. But the Pakistanis like to imagine that they are going to be what Mr. Modi's legacy will be. And so Mr. Modi might just be well disposed towards them in his 3rd term. And they are hoping that he softens and, for his legacy issues. And they hope to make a killing out of it. And I mean, there's a word on the word killing because they would love to kill as many Indians as possible, and they would love to make a killing in terms of doing trade with India and helping to improve their own economy. The other hope that the Pakistanis have is, again, I think a little far-fetched, but they seem to think that the growing closeness between India and some of the Arab states, in particular the UAE and Saudi Arabia, where massive inroads have been made by the Modi government in reaching out, in cooperating with both these two very important countries, which themselves have gone through massive change. The Pakistanis are harboring a belief and a faith and a hope that maybe, what the other countries, the European countries, America, other countries could not do, maybe the Middle Eastern countries, Saudi Arabia, UAE might be able to do, which is intercede on Pakistan's behalf with India, get them some concessions, get Mr. Modi to cut some slack for the Pakistanis, give them some face-saving so that the Pakistanis can do business with India. That seems to be the other hope they are having, that in the event Mr. Modi was to win the election, then maybe they could use the offices of the Saudis and the UAE to reach out to India. Maybe these are people who can mediate between India, despite India's aversion to any third-party mediation. In any case, they could play the role of some kind of, honest broker to bring the two sides together, provide some platform, provide some space where the two countries can interact, which has happened in the past as well, because some of the back-channel talks that have taken place between India and Pakistan have taken place in places like Dubai. But to construe from that either the Saudis or the UAE will be inclined to pressure Mr. Modi, who wins a third term, if at all he does, that they will be inclined to pressure or influence him to kiss and make up with Pakistan, I don't think that's going to happen. It will not happen as long as Pakistan does not give up its inimical behavior towards India. It does not end its animosity towards India. It does not stop questioning the reality of India, and it learns to reconcile to the reality of India. Until that is to happen, and the telltale signs of that, we know what those are going to be, and we'll be able to make that out. But until that is going to happen, to expect that somebody's intercession will help both the countries kiss and make up in Mr. Modi's third term, if at all that was to come about, I don't think that's realistic. But then, like I said, when Pakistanis talk about India, it's crazy, it's bizarre, it's delusional. That is Pakistan.